So this is the Enduro 2, and well, it's got everything. How's it going, folks? I'm Des with DesFit, and this is the brand new Garmin Enduro 2. So when Garmin launched the original Enduro, they had one goal in mind: insane battery life, and they certainly delivered on that front. But that came at a cost. Although the original Enduro shares many of the same features as the Fenix 6X, to get that insane battery life, they actually had to remove some features, and one big feature in particular, maps. And considering that the Enduro is aimed at the ultra endurance crowd, well, that's a pretty big deal. But Garmin listened, and with the Enduro 2, there are no compromises. So with the Enduro 2, you're going to get everything that the Fenix 7X Sapphire Solar has, along with even longer battery life and an improved flashlight. So kind of like a Fenix 7X Ultra, which I guess is kind of appropriate considering who this watch is for. But the Enduro 2 also comes with some features that just came out with their recently released Forerunner 955, and even some features that just came out with their Edge 1040 bike computer. So it has maps, it has music, it has Wi-Fi, it has a power sapphire lens with solar charging, it has a touchscreen, it has a titanium bezel and back, it has training readiness and HRV status from the Forerunner 955, it has cycling power guide from the Edge 1040, and plenty of other new features that we'll go over in this video. So I've been testing the Enduro 2 over the course of the summer, and it's basically been my daily driver for about the last month and a half or so, so I've got a pretty good idea of all the ins and outs of all the new features. But along with that, I've got plenty of tests for you in regards to GPS accuracy using their new Stat IQ mode, battery life tests, altimeter accuracy, heart rate accuracy, and plenty more. So I guess without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into it. So first off, the Enduro 2 in terms of materials is identical to the Fenix 7X Sapphire Solar, where it has a sapphire glass lens, it has solar charging, it has a touchscreen, and it also has a titanium bezel and back. The original Enduro came in a stainless steel version as well as a titanium version, but with the Enduro 2, they just decided to go titanium and just said one and done. If we compare the Fenix 7X and the Enduro 2 side by side, well, they're nearly identical when it comes to dimensions. However, the Enduro 2 is just a tiny bit thicker than the Fenix 7X, and the reason for this is that they made room for a bigger battery. With the original Enduro, they kept the same dimensions as the Fenix 6X, but they had to kind of gut the inside to get longer battery life, but they also gutted some features. With the Enduro 2, they just said, let's just give people what they want and get all the features and make it just a little bit thicker to get longer battery life. And in terms of wearability, even though it's just slightly thicker, I really didn't notice much of a difference between this and the Fenix 7X. And just like the original Enduro, the Enduro 2 comes with Garmin's UltraFit band, and this band is amazing, by the way, but they also decided to include a silicone band inside the box. And for the UltraFit band, well, I love this band, but I do have one minor complaint about it. And for what's great about it, it's super comfortable. It has just the right amount of stretch to it, and it's super secure on the wrist without being uncomfortable, which also aids in getting better heart rate accuracy. And the Velcro is also super secure where it doesn't accidentally detach, and it almost gets better over time where it gets more secure once the soft portion pills a little bit. It does hold moisture, of course, after a workout or a shower, but it dries out in maybe like 30 to 45 minutes, and even faster if you take off the watch. And if you're curious if it holds any odors, well, after 6 weeks of workouts, it smells just fine, and I've got some pretty toxic sweat. Oh, and going back to my only complaint about this band, well, it currently only comes in the 26mm option. It doesn't come in the 24 or 22mm option, so I can't buy one for my mid-size Fenix 7, so I just love to have that option. Take my money. Now, since the Enduro 2 is slightly larger and has a larger battery inside, you may be wondering how much more it weighs than a Fenix 7X Sapphire Solar, but this kind of gets interesting because it comes with two different bands. So the Fenix 7X Sapphire Solar with a silicone band weighs 89 grams, and then the case itself weighs 61 grams. The Enduro 2 case by itself weighs 63.6 grams, at least on my scale, so just a couple grams more, basically nothing. But here's what's interesting. The UltraFit band weighs considerably less than the silicone band, so there's a 20 gram difference between the two, which kind of shocked me when I put them on the scale. So with the UltraFit band, the Enduro 2 weighed 69.3 grams. With the silicone band, the total weight comes out to 92 grams. So yes, just a couple grams more than the Fenix 7X Sapphire Solar for comparing apples to apples, but the weight difference of the UltraFit band really does make a difference in terms of wearability. Oh, and really quick, if you're finding the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button down below. It's a small little thing that you can do that'll help this video and the channel quite a bit, and I appreciate it. Another thing that the Enduro 2 gets that's found on the Fenix 7X is a flashlight, but an even brighter flashlight. So when Garmin first told me about the flashlight feature on the 7X, I was like, a flashlight, but let me tell you that it has easily become one of my favorite features of the 7X, and I use it constantly. And with the Enduro 2, well, what they've done here is made that flashlight even brighter, and what you may notice is that the lens covering the LED, well, on the Fenix 7X, it's kind of subdued and sort of makes it less noticeable and blends in with the case when it's off. With the Enduro 2, the lens is clear and it's just not apologetic at all. It's just out there. And in terms of how bright it is, here's a comparison with the Fenix 7X and the Enduro 2 in both day and night, and there's clearly a big difference between the two. So now let's get on to battery life, which is really what the Enduro series is all about. So the Fenix 7X, it's no slouch in the battery life department already, being able to get up to 28 days as a smartwatch without recording any outdoor activities. And with the Enduro 2, they've upped that to 34 days, and that's without solar charging. If you were to have enough solar power, you can get up to 46 days out of the Enduro 2. And then for battery life for recording outdoor activities in its full blast, highest power, highest accuracy multi-band satellite system setting, the Enduro 2 can get up to 68 hours compared to the 7X at 36 hours. That's a huge difference. But for real world battery life, well, I've been wearing this 24/7 and using it to record all my outdoor activities for about the last month and a half, and I've had to charge it maybe just a couple times. Now, the Enduro 2 does have amazing battery life, but what's interesting is that the original Enduro does have longer standby battery life just using it as a smartwatch. However, for GPS battery life in the GPS only setting, comparing basically apples to apples, the Enduro 2 actually does get quite a bit more than the original Enduro. Still, even though the Enduro 2 may not have as long a standby battery life as the original Enduro, that's a small price to pay considering it has all the features of the Fenix 7X. So on the GPS side of things, the Enduro 2 gets their new multi-band satellite system positioning mode, and this allows the watch to leverage multiple satellite systems on 2 frequencies at one time. And this is super useful in situations where satellite signals can get a little bit iffy, like under heavy tree cover, next to tall buildings, as well as rock faces where satellite signals can kind of bounce off of those objects. And I'll tell you that from all my testing with the Fenix 7X, the Forerunner 955, the Garmin Epics, as well as the Enduro 2, that it's easily some of the most accurate that I've ever seen. However, that does come at a cost, and that's going to be battery life. But Garmin has something up their sleeve to address this. It's called Sat IQ, or you may see this in the settings called Auto Select. So the thing is, you may not need that supercharged highest accuracy mode all the time. So let's say I'm on a mountain bike ride where at some moments I'm going to be in the wide open where satellite signals are probably not going to be an issue. And then at other moments, I'm going to be under a lot of heavy tree cover. And that's where Sat IQ comes into play, where the Enduro 2 is able to automatically switch between the modes based on the conditions. And does this all silently in the background, where it only enables the highest accuracy setting if it notices that the satellite signal degrades, and then switches to the lower modes when it's not needed to save on battery life. Now, 2 questions do come up here, of course, with this feature. So number one is it still accurate if it's just automatically switching modes all by itself? And the second question is, does it really save on battery life? So in terms of the accuracy of their auto select or Sat IQ mode, here's a trail run that I did, and this trail has tons of good stuff to test this out, like plenty of switchbacks, tall rock faces right beside the trail, canyon walls, as well as wide open areas. And what I did here was I was wearing the Forerunner 955 Solar on one wrist using their highest accuracy multi-band mode, and the Enduro 2 on the other wrist using the auto select or Sat IQ mode. And as you can see from the total distances, we're good to go here. But how about the finer detail of the GPS tracks? So the orange line that you see is the Enduro 2 using Sat IQ, and the purple line is the Forerunner 955, and the blue line is, well, another watch that I carried along for comparison. But as you can see, the Enduro 2 in the Sat IQ mode is basically right in line with the 955 the entire time. So along this portion here at the beginning next to some tall rocks, the Enduro 2 and the 955 are pretty darn close to each other, and considering the conditions including the tree cover, very good. Now, as I headed down the hill, though, running at faster speeds, this is where I did see a little bit more variance with the Enduro 2 versus the 955. So like in this corner here, the Enduro 2 cut in just ever so slightly where the 955 was holding solidly with the trail. Not like it was that far off, but the 955 was just a smidge better. And then over here on these switchbacks, you see that the 955 and the Enduro 2 were nearly identical. But on the first switchback, the Enduro 2 cut in just ever so slightly, but overall, in terms of accuracy, well, I think Sat IQ works. And again, the final distance on the run was basically identical, so no worries there. And then when it comes to the Enduro 2's multi-band accuracy, well, I couldn't really ask for any better. On this mountain bike ride here, it stayed on the trail pretty much the entire time, and it was right in line with the Forerunner 955. But now let's talk about battery life, and this needed kind of a different type of testing scenario. So what I did here is I did the same mountain bike ride 2 times. The first ride I did it with Sat IQ, and then the next ride I just locked it into the multi-band mode. And then to keep things as equal as possible, since the Enduro 2 does have solar charging, I went ahead and covered the Enduro 2 with a wristband to eliminate that variable, and that doesn't affect GPS accuracy, by the way. Oh, and for one final note, I was using the optical heart rate sensor on the Enduro 2, and I had it paired with a power meter. So first off, as you can see from the total distances from both rides from the Enduro 2 and the 955, extremely close, but the ride with the auto select mode on the Enduro 2 was just a smidge off. And when I mean a smidge, I really do mean a smidge. 7/100ths of a mile on this length of the ride is really nothing. But going back to battery life, on the ride using their highest power multiband mode on the Enduro 2, it used about 1.71% per hour, which in theory would yield almost 60 hours. So not quite 68 hours, but in all fairness, they do say up to 68 hours, but it's still considerably more than the Fenix 7X. But hold on to your hats here though. So in the Sat IQ or auto select mode, it used just 1.2% of the battery per hour, which puts it over 80 hours. So that's super, super impressive. So in terms of accuracy, sure, just a tiny bit more accurate when I locked it into the multi-band mode, but in terms of battery saving, that's pretty significant. So for me, I'm just going to keep it in auto select mode. So next up, let's talk about some features that are clearly aimed for trail runners as well as ultra endurance athletes. So like I mentioned before, the Enduro 2 gets full-blown topo and landscape maps just like the Fenix 7X, so there's no compromise now with the Enduro 2 in that department. And then in addition, it also has a touchscreen, so using those maps is super convenient. And it also has the same 32 gigabytes of storage, just like the Fenix 7X Sapphire Solar, so you'll be able to load tons of maps on there for plenty of regions. But there's also a new feature related to maps though, which is what they're calling Next Fork. And as the name implies, it gives you information on the next fork in the trail. And this is all automatic. You don't need to load in a course or anything to get this information. So basically when you're on the map page, there's this little indication of the next fork in the trail ahead and the distance to that fork. And this is just super useful here, where it just gives you an idea of the distance to the next branch in the trail. Another new feature to come with the Enduro 2 is grade adjusted pace. So pace is great and all when you're on flat ground, but as soon as you're on hilly terrain, well, your pace is going to be skewed because of the terrain. So what grade adjusted pace is that it gives you an estimation of your flat ground equivalent pace when you're on hilly terrain. And then for the ultra endurance athletes, there's a new auto rest timer feature. So what this does is that when you're using the ultra run profile, when you come to a stop, it automatically initiates a rest timer. And I found this to be pretty darn responsive, where it takes just like 4 to 5 seconds to kick in. And the reason that this is useful compared to something like an auto pause feature is that this will have a timer right on the screen, so you can keep track of how long you've been resting versus auto pause, which simply pauses the activity and you don't get that info. And then of course, as soon as you get rolling again, it'll automatically stop the rest period. And then it'll also log all this information in your activity summary, so you have a nice breakdown that you can analyze later. You still can go ahead and press the lower right-hand key on the Ultra Run profile to initiate the rest timer, but this just takes the guesswork out of it, because the last thing you may want to be thinking about during an Ultra is pressing buttons. Oh, and by the way, the auto rest feature does work in conjunction with manually pressing a button, so you can manually initiate the rest period if you like, and then as soon as you get rolling, it'll automatically just stop the rest period. I hope that makes sense. And then on the cycling end of things, the Enduro 2 also gets some features that just came out with their new Edge 1040 bike computer, and the first one is called Cycling Ability. So what this does is it analyzes your past training to give you a classification of what style of cyclist you are. So for me, it has me as a climber, and with the amount of mountain biking I do, I think that's about right. Another thing that the Enduro 2 gets that came out on the Edge 1040 bike computer is their Power Guide feature. So Power Guide is basically a way for you to create a power strategy based on a predefined course that you'll set up in Garmin Connect. And where this can be useful is if you need a guide to help you better manage your power output during a ride, and it also give you a general idea of your completion time. And then what you do after you have it set up in Garmin Connect is you load it onto your Enduro 2, and it'll give you a guide for your power output during a ride. I actually went into a lot of detail of that feature in my Edge 1040 review, so I'd encourage you to check out that review, which I'll have linked down in the description below for more details. And another thing that makes its way from their bike computers is when you load in a route, they now have chevrons showing the direction of travel on the route. So just like the Fenix 7X and the Forerunner 955, the Enduro 2 comes with nearly anything that you can think of when it comes to activity profiles, from tons of different profiles for running, cycling, outdoor recreation, gym profiles, I mean just tons of stuff. But when it comes to adding those profiles and finding those profiles that you need, well, it was kind of a gigantic list that you had to sort through on older devices. So what they've done here is a more organized and categorized way of sorting through those profiles. So now they've grouped these into buckets, so they're just a little bit easier to find based on the activity type when you want to add those profiles. And then in addition to all those features, the Enduro 2 comes with Garmin's new training readiness feature that just came out with the Forerunner 955, their new HRV status feature, as well as native running power with an accessory. And then on the smartwatch side of things, you can receive text notifications whether you're on an Android phone or an iPhone. And then you also have offline music storage and playback with music services like Spotify, Amazon Music, and Deezer. You'll also be able to get weather information, see calendar events, and it also has Garmin Pay. Basically everything that you're going to get with the Fenix 7X as well as the Forerunner 955, with just one exception, but this is just temporary. So the morning report feature that came out with the 955, that's not coming out at launch with the Enduro 2, but it's coming out with a firmware update later on down the road. Okay, so now on to heart rate accuracy. So the Enduro 2 comes with Garmin's latest 4th generation elevated heart rate sensor, and I've been getting very accurate results out of it from the Forerunner 255, the 955, as well as the Fenix 7S. The Fenix 7X, even though it has the exact same heart rate sensor, I tend to get slightly less accurate results, and the reason for that is that it's a larger and heavier watch, and what happens with larger and heavier watches is that they tend to bounce around and wrist a little bit more. So the Enduro 2, well, it's basically the same as the 7X. However, the Enduro 2 has the UltraFit band, and I have found this band to make a considerable difference when it comes to accuracy. So on this indoor bike ride on Zwift, you can see that the Enduro 2 was pretty much perfectly in line with the other sensors, even with plenty of changes in heart rate. If I had to nitpick, there was one spot right here where it's just a couple seconds slower to track the drop in heart rate, and an ever so slight blip right here where it's 4 beats per minute off, but other than that, this is essentially perfect. And then for running, well, it's pretty hard to even tell much of a difference here at all too. So there is this one spot right here where I had a momentary blip, but other than that, it's pretty darn solid. And then for some road biking outside, the results sort of speak for themselves here, but if we want a pixel peep, it took just about a minute or so to lock on, but that's pretty typical for a wrist-based optical heart rate sensor. And then there's a tiny bit of shakiness right around here, and then a small dip here, but seriously, I really can't complain about this ride in terms of accuracy. It is darn good for outdoor road biking. But now let's get into some activities that pose a lot of challenges for wrist-based optical heart rate sensors, and these are going to include mountain biking as well as weight training and high-intensity interval training. So with mountain biking, well, you're going to be gripping onto the handlebars, as well as there's going to be some wrist flexion and tons of rough terrain, which is going to make the watch bounce around. But I have to say here, folks, that this was a super impressive result that I got from the Enduro 2 for mountain biking, like really good actually. So basically over the entire ride, it was incredibly close to the external heart rate sensors I was using as references. There were these moments here at the tail end of the ride though, where it lost track for just a bit, but what I want to show you is that this is pretty typical when you're descending down rough terrain, where if it's rough, well, the watch may bounce around, but overall, this is a very good result, and I think it has a lot to do with that UltraFit band. And then for weight training, there's going to be variables involved like gripping onto the dumbbells, as well as a lot of varying arm movement. And again, this is just a really challenging type of activity for these types of sensors to even track. There's certainly more variance here versus the other activities, but it's kind of to be expected with wrist-based optical heart rate sensors and weight training. It's just kind of challenging, but I think overall it did a pretty decent job, and also did a pretty good job with the high-intensity intervals at the end. But in the whole scheme of things, for a watch that's this large, it's not necessarily super light either. I was super impressed with the accuracy I got out of it, and I think a lot of it has to do with that UltraFit band. So again, Garmin, I just love it in those other size options. Oh, and lastly, I also wanted to cover altimeter accuracy, and I had some pretty good results here. So this is the first ride that I did with the Enduro 2 a while back, and you can see that it's pretty close to the other devices, as well as the corrected elevation figure in Strava, which is based on their maps. And if we loop back to the Sat IQ battery life test, same deal here, where it's pretty close, but on the second ride, it was a little bit farther off. Nothing crazy, but just a little hair over. So Garmin basically threw everything they had at the Enduro 2. It has maps, it has a sapphire glass lens, it has a touchscreen, it has solar charging, along with longer battery life than the 7X, as well as a brighter flashlight. Of course, those upgrades do come at a cost, so the Enduro 2 runs $1099, which certainly is a lot of money, but if we do the math, a 7X Sapphire Solar that runs $999, an UltraFit band that runs $59. So you're basically paying $40 more for longer battery life, as well as that brighter flashlight. Is that worth it? Well, I'd love to know your thoughts on that, so definitely leave a comment down in the comment section down below, and on your way down there, if you found the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and just hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for plenty more sports tech videos that are coming soon. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.